I'm continuing the reading of the 12th major arcanum of the Mebes tarot majors, which is the Hanged Man, Lamed. We advise students to meditate particularly on the Mem and Shin phases, relating them to the hermetic elements, fire, earth, air and water, that correspond. 12 equals 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. Here we deal with the quaternary, whose elements can be studied one by one, either as a static ternary or as a dynamic Gnostic cycle. Yod-He-Vav. Among many examples, we can take the quaternary of spring, summer, fall and winter, dividing each of these stations in 3 months. It is, however, preferable to re-examine the example of the human incarnation, grouping the titles already enumerated, this time in a quaternary. The first element of the quaternary shall consist of the following conditions: Vita, life, Yod; Lucrum, which means the material conditions, He; and Fratres, brothers, Vow. Note that the first factor already exists within ourselves. The second can be created by us or fertilized. The third is given to us by fate, but we can influence it and, in turn, suffer its influence as well. The second element, the Gnostic transformation of life, is subdivided into the following factors: Genitor, the father, who, again, due to the laws of heredity, lives partially in us ourselves, we ourselves. Nati, the children, whose existence depends partly on our desire to have them. Veletudo, health, and in the figurative sense, the servants and helpers we are given partially by destiny. The third element, Fratres, naturally and inevitably influences us and for us is influenced. In it we find the following factors: Uxor, the wife who merges with us; Mor, death, which depends partly on our way of expending vital forces; Pietas, devotion, which is to some extent the expression of gratitude of human nature for its existence. The fourth element allows us to evaluate the breadth and the achievements during incarnation. And here there are also 3 factors: Regnum, kingdom, which potentially hides within ourselves; Benefactor, everything that is acquired; and Carcer, the prison, the impediments and limitations imposed by destiny. It is certain that we can fight them, but they restrict us. It would be good to memorize these titles, useful in the study of astrology. They can be easily remembered in the form of traditional hexameters of the medieval schools: Vita, Lucrum, Fratres, Genitor, Nate, Veletudo, Uxor, Mors, Pietas, Regnum, Benefactor, Carcer. I'll show you that. "12 equals 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. This decomposition gives a scheme of 6 pairs of the Yod-He type, connected by a common cyclic routine. To be consistent, we apply the scheme again to the previous example. The first pair will consist of the elements Vita and Lucrum. The reserve of the vital forces of the individual vivifies and fecundates his material environment. A human being, to develop his activity, needs material means, just as a husband needs his wife. According to the individual's needs, his reserve of vital forces creates an appropriate material environment, just as a yod forms a corresponding he. However, one must not forget that the material environment without its ruler would be completely sterile. Once again, I haven't closed my email. The second pair consists of fratres and genitor. The term fratres, by its meaning, obliges us to go back to the term parent as the conditional yod which creates the corresponding he. Often the fratres we encounter awaken in us the interest in the parent of the whole family. The third pair, nati and valitudo, has an element yod, the process of family, and as an element he, the environment that helps to achieve this continuation and the preservation of the entities generated. They are therefore the servers that help in creating and protecting children. The fourth pair, uxor and mor, put the wife or spouse as the positive role of the binary, whose field is limited by the element of death. In other words, marriage guarantees work and solidarity throughout the incarnation, but is the arcanum of the change of plane, which is death. The next pair, pietas and regnum, is very edifying. Religiousness serves as a measure for the ability to receive higher inflows in human practical activity. Regnum, a measure for the transmission of these inflows downwards. The general picture of human achievement, vow, is outlined by the intertwining of these two processes. The last pair, benefactor and causa, gives us the picture of the limitations of success in life by what we call karmic impediments. This does not deplete the interpretation of the bipolarization scheme of the duodenum. We can distribute its elements in a different way and obtain once again 6 marriages, or, if in these the union was not performed, then their binaries. Putting together the first element with the seventh, that is, vita with uxor, we will have, on the one hand, the life of a separate individuality, on the other, the union with another individuality. With 2 units which retain their independence, we will have the binary Adam, the positive, and Eve, negative. That is, the antagonism of the sexes. If the spouses merge, forming a single unit, the binary referred to becomes realized, and then, instead of the opposition of the poles, we will have a powerful unity, indivisible and androgynous, Yod-Heva. Adding the second element, lucrum, to the 8th, mors, we will get the mysterious and depressing binary of terrestrial wealth, positive, and the inevitable law of death, negative, that mocks the rich and confirms that the power of terrestrial wealth is only an illusion. This binary can be neutralized if terrestrial wealth is used not for selfish purposes, but creating, on the material plane, with the aspiration and conscious effort, support points for the work of future generations for humanity. This is an indispensable condition. Let's confront the elements, fratres and pietas. On the one hand, we will have the environment and the state evolution of our own generation. On the other, tradition, the hierarchical transmission of superior influences. Again, the neutralization of these elements will depend on ourselves. The next binary, genitor regnum, makes us understand that we are in a certain manifestation of Arcanum XIII. We have a father, genitor, but also we are the yod in the field of our own activity, regnum. Then comes the binary nati benefactor, that is, On the one hand, the transmission of life, in the sense of transmitting something of itself, a part of its own vital forces, and on the other hand, the reception of fluids, the condensation of forces, the attainment of success in life. The duodenary ends with the binary that is perhaps the most difficult to neutralize, valetudo, carcere, that is, well-being, prison. All of these deconstructions in our analysis were applied to a human incarnation. For what the student can metaphysically generalize the schema of the duodenary, we will take the example of classical configuration of the zodiacal signs. This figure, in its central part, indicates the polarity, positive or negative, of the signs. The astrological symbols of the signs are placed on the cusps, that is, at the initial points of the corresponding ecliptic arcs. In the sectors of signs are indicated the hermetic elements to which they belong: fire, earth, water, or air. In Latin letters are written the Hebrew names of the magical 12-month solar calendar. The beginning of the magical year, as it has been said, corresponds to the vernal equinox, that is, of spring, in the northern hemisphere. Thus, for example, the month of Nisan begins approximately on the 21st of March and ends around the 21st of April, etc. The figure, besides the indications on the composition of the duodenary, also presents the scheme of the planetary regencies. At the moment we are interested only in the outer part of the figure, that is, the distribution of the planets and the signs that govern. The Sun and Moon are placed respectively on the signs of Leo and Cancer. The Sun occupies the right and the Moon to the left of the figure. Of the two sides, that is, both on the side of the Sun and that of the Moon, the planets are distributed as follows. The signs adjacent to the Sun or Moon belong to Mercury, the planet closest to the Sun in our solar system. The two signs following belong to Venus, the second planet in the order of its distance from the Sun. Then we have two signs belonging to Mars, then to Jupiter, and finally two contiguous signs, Saturn, thus obeying the order of the distance of the planets from the Sun. The figures in the shaded parts are called nocturnal domiciles of the planets, as the white parts daytime households. The Sun has only one sign, diurnal, and the Moon also has one sign, nocturnal. All planets have two domiciles, one diurnal and one nocturnal. The sequence of signs in shades of white divides the circle into 6 pairs or binaries of the duodenary, of which 3 binaries are relatively positive, diurnal domiciles of the planets, and 3 relatively negative, nighttime domiciles. As a practical exercise, we advise students in the duodenary of human life we've analysed to interpret the binaries Vita, Lucrum, Nati, Valetudo, and Pietas, Regnum, as positive in relation to the 3 remaining, Fratres Genitor, Uxor, Mor, and Benefactor, Carcer. By doing so, you will clearly see the light sectors, the day domiciles. Meditation on the duodenum scheme is so important to the process of self-initiation of the incarnated individuality that this scheme started one of the most well-known pantaculos, the mystical cross. That's the mystical cross. The instructor places the image of this cross on the forehead of the disciple who initiates or has already begun, as a symbol of the blessing to the prickly path. That was the prickly, the prickly throat. The instructor places the image of this cross on the forehead of the disciple, who initiates or has already begun, as symbol of a blessing to the prickly path of the 12 stages of the earthly incarnation. The protrusions which end the arms of the cross symbolize these steps. The path starts at the center of the upper arm. Let's look at the picture closely. The central protrusions of both vertical arms of the cross are marked with a positive sign and the yod and the vow. However, yod is totally positive, while vow, although it has the active element, is androgynous. The central protrusions of the horizontal arms are marked with the negative sign because they correspond to the passive sign he. However, the right arm, which corresponds to the second he, is more active than the left, since the second he becomes the yod of the next cycle. It has therefore in itself the germ of future activity, while the first he, in this capacity as mother, can give only an androgynous fruit, which is vow. We can deduce from all this that the mystical cross is a Kabbalistic cross, in which the upper and the right predominate over the lower and the left, and the vertical and the horizontal. This cross confirms the hierarchical superiority of the asset over the passive, subtle over the dense, and confirms it through the elements of the Yod-He-Vav-He cycle. However, this is only the explanation of the astral scheme of the mystical cross. It remains for us to explain Kabbalistically the symbolism of the 12 protrusions. To do so, we put the letter Shin in the center of the cross. Thus, he is transformed into the Redeemer cliché Yod-He-Shin-Vav-He. It is the scheme of hermetic force, Shin, acting in the world, Yod-He-Vav-He, with the intention of realizing in him what is symbolized by the Shin, that is, that which is inevitably linked to the law of sacrifice. The sacrifice can be made on the plane of the testament, in the field of human mercy, or even in the physical plane, such as, for example, the sacrifice of the vitality of the sun for the benefit of the earth. In the center of the cross would be placed the sign Aleph instead of Shin. In this case, the cross would assume a different meaning. It would become a synthetic schema of the 3 planes of the universe. We would say more, in a scheme of the full understanding of these planes according to the law of Hermes Trismegistus. The Aleph in the center represents a balanced mentality, the 4 arms the great law, Yod-He-Vav-He, of the astral creations, and the protrusions that end the arms, the 12 arcs of the zodiac on the physical plane. In other words, it is a scheme of the complication and the multiplication that govern each passage to density. The sum of the numerical values of the Aleph sign is 9. 10 plus 5 plus 6 plus 5 plus 1 equals 27, which deconstructs to 9, corresponding to the Arcanum of initiation. Meditation on the mystical cross, in any of its Kabbalistic interpretations, always helps fertilize ideas emerging in their respective subplane. We repeat that, in order to penetrate the meaning of Arcanum XII, we must convince ourselves of the necessity of sacrifice on the physical plane, or the limitation of this plane in which, in the progressive descent to the denser layers, one inevitably comes to a wall, which is the limit of the coagulation of the illusory. this wall serves as a foothold in the opposite direction, the ascent to cross all subplanes in the opposite direction. The first of these possibilities is more understandable to those who deeply feel the gospel. The second, those who are closest to Buddhism. In the context of the 12th Arcanum, the complex chord, human individuality, is like a strange visitor on the earth plane, someone who is outside his home. The visitor, of course, should be courteous, must be ready to give way to any other guest, should neither criticize nor refuse food being served, nor any of the accommodation of the house. However, you should never forget that he owns his own home or neglect the interests of that home. You must remember that any gossip or misconduct in another's home will have negative consequences for his or her own, and that every misuse of their talents in the social field will pay with the privations in their own home. Parties and receptions may have a certain value as a point of support for constructive work, but in themselves they are pure illusion and have nothing of real value. We can, our perishable physical shell distracting us into futile social pastimes, coagulate the Malkuth, but if we are sufficiently developed, we must not forget the inevitable and beneficial hour to return home, the hour of death, so well symbolized by the attributes of the Lodge of the Masters in Masonic initiation. As for that hour in which the human being takes up his rights to a purely astral life, and how much to the various transient stages between the two key modes of existence and the post-incarnation stage, of which we will speak in the next Arcanum 13. Notes on the 12th Arcanum. This Arcanum is thought to conceal momentous secrets and hold the key to great mysteries. A clue is to be found in the sign of the Hebrew letter Lamed, which is the only letter in that alphabet which reaches above the baseline. In Hebrew, letters are written below the line, in contrast with most modern languages, which are based above the line. This indicates the exalted position of the Lamed as it extends towards the divine, like a vow upon the calf. The hanged man of this Arcanum is an adept who has been able to put into practice the teachings of his master. He has accomplished the spiritual exercises of the preceding Arcana and is resting, as if suspended in his solution, in the powerful 12th position. The upper part of the letter he represents is seen as a mysterious tower in the air, which evokes powers of ascension and or levitation. It is a very important letter for those who want to learn more about the divine. The full spelling of the letter Lamed, Mem, Daleth, Lamed, Mem, Daleth, is a shortened version of phrase, a heart that understands knowledge. The vow, inherent in the upper section of Lamed, represents the spiritual self which reaches for godliness and channels the spiritual energy from above into the human being, signified by the calf, which it rests upon. In this way does the Lamed merge spiritual and physical qualities via a powerful teaching impulse. Through this Arcanum, we discover that our spiritual roots are in heaven, and from this celestial foundation do we reach down to earth. In Meditations on the Tarot, the powerful image of Jesus walking on the water is evoked to explain the individual whose gravitation is entirely towards heaven, and yet without shunning the domain of earth, which constitutes the usual force of gravitation for the majority of human beings. Gravitation being the pertinent force in question with respect to this Arcanum, our attention is also drawn to the contrasting image of Simon Magus, who we are told was able to levitate. Here we must make the distinction between an individual who levitates through the power of celestial attraction, gravitation towards the heavens, and one who is lifted from below by an electrified force of repulsion via the root chakra and through the kundalini. An even more sinister analogy can be found for this unholy form of levitation in the broomsticks of witches, which is very far from being similar to the celestial rising of saints. We are told that the Nephilim, sons of God, changed their celestial gravitational orientation in order to be enfolded by earthly gravitational influences received through the daughters of men. Thus were heroes and supermen, the giants, born, whilst celestial radiation gives birth to the Sadiq, or righteous men. The world is divided, says Tomberg, between those who worship the strong men and those who revere the righteous. We cannot serve two masters, and are therefore asked to align ourselves with the righteous and ensure our orientation is towards heavenly radiation, lest we risk being enfolded or even swallowed by the earth. The will of the spiritual man is connected with and aligned with the divine will, the zodiacalized will, which emanates from the heavens above and leads us towards the solarization of thought. Such spiritual alignment is dependent upon faith and requires effort and application, especially in the realms of thought, memory, and imagination. Meditating upon this arcanum helps to educate our minds in the proper direction of spiritual orientation. And that's the 12th arcanum.